want to introduce, starting on one side here, first is Dr. Douglas Montaigne. He is a history professor here at Grand Valley State University. Thank you for being here. We get into Dr. Jim Bratt, and I apologize, I've got to look at some of the people's titles. He's with Calvin College, professor of history as well. Charlie Honey, anybody know who Charlie is? I had a feeling that would happen. Charlie's a longtime religion columnist here with the Grand Rapids Press and now doing columns several different places. So appreciate you being here. And then we get into Dr. Robert Marco. He is the chair of theology at Aquinas College here in town. And last but not least is Christopher Westerbeek, who is a pastor at Richmond Reformed Church here in town. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to our moderator this evening.
Thank you, son. I am so pleased to be here. I'm hoping, and what I would like for this time to be is maybe with a few questions that I can toss out, kind of prime the pump for our panelists, but I'm really looking for the engagement. And so after I've kind of primed the pump on a few areas and they've had an opportunity to comment, I'm hoping that all of you will have some further questions that you want to ask or something that came out of what you saw that you said, can you comment on that for me? So that's kind of how I'm looking to play this out. And so let's attempt to engage. I kind of told the panelists before we came in here, the first thing that I was just going to toss out at them, the first time you heard about the series God in America, or the first time you looked at what we just looked at now, your reaction was, and we'll start over there.
I think it's a welcome addition to, there's really a lot of documentaries about history that are available now, the History Channel and so forth, and there haven't been that many about religion, and I think this is a welcome addition to that. I think it meets a need to have a good documentary about a very important part of American history. So that was my first reaction to it.
Yeah, I really like the production values. I mean, it's done very well, as you would expect from the producer. I teach American religious history, and so this is familiar to me. I love to see the stuff up on the screen. At the same time, I'm thinking religion is never just by itself. It's always connected up with other stuff. So that wasn't the complete story of Abraham Lincoln's decision. It was a big part of it, which has been neglected a lot. But religion was connected up there with diplomacy, with war needs, and so forth.
Well, we'll move through some of it. When we get to the Lincoln section, we'll jump all over it if we can.
Well, the Lincoln section was the first part of this series that I saw, and I was really riveted by the drama of that situation. No doubt there were some Hollywood production values involved, but just how his personal spiritual struggle related to what was going on politically, and that's a sort of a subtext, I think, of so much of what's happened in America is what has gone on inside of people and how that has influenced their actions, whether it's Lincoln or Anne Hutchinson or Martin Luther King. Just that power of religion, and to see it brought to life was very exciting to me. I think it's a wonderful addition to our cultural understanding of this.
I think the title kind of frightened me, God in America. It made me nervous, quite candidly. But as I saw this, I was really impressed by the theme. Maybe another subtext is that of suffering, and how the death of Willie, in Lincoln's case, brought him a year later, or almost a year later, to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. And secondly, the sense in the story of King, where Andrew Young speaks about suffering, and have the blacks suffered enough in the South for Kennedy to get involved? Have they suffered enough for Johnson to be very serious about a Voting Rights Act?
I appreciate being able to back clean up. I'll handle anything you guys miss. Quite frankly, the first thing that entered my mind as I was watching was Michael Emerson. I was like, where's the smoke monster? Because I'm used to him being in Lost. And so, but really what that did was kind of just, again, brought out the high quality of taking something that we don't have documentation of. Like with a lot of the later stuff, we can actually see that. And from my generation, that's really important. You look at the technology and being able to see history. It brings it from the dryness of a page to life. And I was really impressed with the way that there was high quality just from this preview. I'm looking forward to the high quality of production value, as well as just that it brings that humanity off the page of history, which then makes it mean so much more to us as human beings. I think it makes it more relatable. So I'm excited. So.
Okay, thank you. Now, I will check. I work for him, so we're going to start here going that way next time. Okay.
I just closed that and cleaned up. I like that.
Again, just trying to prime the pump. What thoughts or reactions did you have in that very opening statement to the piece? Absolutely, right at the beginning of the kind of promo piece, the person made this statement: for those in America who know religion matters, and for those who wish it didn't matter so much.
I think it just encompasses, I guess, the whole audience of people who will be watching. And for me, as a pastor, it excites me to know that it's not just geared towards one audience or another. And I think it was down on the end. Douglas. I think he was saying that there's not a lot of religious documentaries of history, and I think to be able to have that right on the onset where you're saying this is for people who this will touch from the religious side, but also people who really have an issue with that, and so I kind of enjoyed that.
Yeah, I just kind of add with one of the other comments that was at that beginning piece, which I think plays into this thought, and that was the professor from Boston University. He said, Americans are awash in a sea of faith, but their knowledge about religious faith and religious history often runs as shallow as their commitment to religion runs deep. Mm-hmm. So again, out of that same context, Dr. Marco, thoughts?
A couple thoughts. First of all, I wonder if this was intended for West Michigan, because I'm a resident alien here, and I've never seen a place where religion matters so much or disturbs so many people because it matters so much. I think this is peculiar to this region, honestly. I'm originally from Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh area. The second comment, would you repeat that again, Roger? The second piece that you addressed.
Well, Americans are awash in a sea of faith, but their knowledge about religious faiths and religious history often run as shallow as their commitments to religion runs deep.
I think that's very interesting. I don't know if it was Pew but corresponding to this series is a test, a religious test.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting. I think that's certainly the observation they make, is that Americans are passionately religious. I mean, statistics I've heard, and Charlie could speak better to this than I, but what 80 to 90% of Americans identify themselves as believers, and what 5%?
About 90%.
About 90%, and yet the test, which is a very simple test. I told my wife I got 100 on it. She said, "You better." But the test, you can link to the test, and it's just 15 simple questions. But you would be amazed that I saw the result of it, and many people got from their own particular tradition got those answers wrong. I was surprised by that.
Yeah, I brought some of those test results, or survey results, just for this discussion, because it was a Pew Religious Knowledge Survey that was taken recently and put out in conjunction or just prior to this series, and there were actually a total of 32 questions, although only 15 were in that sort of online sample version, and the average score was 16, so the average score was an E. The average score was an E, and that in Christians were an E. The people who did the best on the test were atheists and agnostics.
I remember that. Yeah.
Followed closely by Jews and Mormons. So it's very interesting. People seem to be more careful, have studied more carefully what they do not believe than the people that do believe. Pretty simple things like Martin Luther inspired the Reformation. Less than half the people answered that correctly. Jonathan Edwards participated in the First Great Awakening. Only 11% identified. So I think a series like this at least can help fill in some of our religious ignorance. But the other thing is, because we believe, like it or not, yeah, we are a religious country. And to me, if you're a religious country, it really is quite necessary to understand our religious history. If you're going to be Glenn Beck and get up in the Washington Mall and say how important God and religion are to our founding, well, let's make sure you know your history, and let's make sure you know what part religion played in the Revolution and in Martin Luther King's life and so forth. Let's know at least what we're talking about when we say we're so religious. So I think this is a great asset to that.
Yeah, I particularly like a production like this because as an educator about American religious history, I think that the knowledge about it in itself can help us be a little more patient and calm down a little bit. Every one of these episodes, as I look over the promotion material, involve highly contentious issues. And each of the snippets that we saw here, there's a backstory there that shows that there's no black and white here. There's no totally right and wrong. There are complexities all over the place. And if we can get ourselves to recognize that, doesn't mean that we have to change our mind, doesn't mean that we have to give up on what we believe, but it does mean that we can be a little more patient and trusting with each other. As a people, we've been here before, okay? And it'll be all right.
Any comment on what's been said, or?
I just want to talk a little bit more, the opening question you asked about religion mattering in the United States. And as a historian of religion, it's a very hard thing to figure out and determine exactly how much religion really does matter. It matters to some extent, but the hard question is, to what extent does it matter? Like, maybe we'll be talking about this in particular, but Lincoln with slavery, there were other reasons other than his own personal religious journey why he may have signed the Declaration, issued the Declaration or the Emancipation Proclamation when he did. And even with individuals, you never, it matters a lot to a lot of individuals, but you never know how sincere they are, whether they're being phony, whether it's something shallow and superficial, it's something that really transforms them, and then how it affects the larger society. Like, for example, leading up to the Civil War, you had the churches all split, depending on whether or not their region of the country had slavery and plantation-based agriculture or not. And was religion just window dressing on those two regions, or was it actually determining the nature in some important way of northern and southern society? And those, I think, are the challenging questions to ask about religion.
They tell me they're trying to keep walking in front of their camera, so I'm going to. One more question kind of out of that first section, and then I'm going to ask you folks if you've got any that you'd like to ask. Same thing in that intro section, this quote, we have had a notion that the United States, is a special place. And what makes it special, a special place, is that we have a special relationship with God. Anybody want to jump on that hand grenade?
Yeah. I think I did fall a little bit onto what Robert was saying. Just with the fear of God in America and how we so closely associate. America is God, and the God particularly that we all worship, and everyone else is not serving God. And that's a really, I don't know. That's a scary notion.
It ties in with two of the characters we saw tonight. John Winthrop, who gave the famous City on a Hill speech. If you read the speech carefully, right at the end when he talks about the city on a hill, he very clearly is meaning that we have a bullseye on us. We're a target. We're not a model. People are watching us to see us fail, and we probably will. or there's a good chance we will. So there's no, with the Puritans, there's whatever else their problems were, there was no automatic sense of God being on our side. It was like Lincoln said, I want to be on God's side. That's the question. And there are, alas, too few leaders in American history who have put the question that, which I think is the right way, certainly the biblical way.
Any of you got a question you'd like to ask at this point before we move on to taking a look at the section on Anne Hutchinson?
I would like to follow up to that point and ask, from the historical perspective, when was it when Americans' perspective shifted to us being on God's side to God being on our side? When did that start? And there's a variety. It wasn't until the 50s, I believe, when God was added to the Pledge of Allegiance. Is that correct? Yeah. So what caused that shift, and when did it happen?
I think it's always a subtext there. It comes and goes. So when you watch the Puritans going into some of these, these genocidal Indian wars that they fought, they're there. 1676, they're there. God is on our side and wants us to get rid of the Canaanites because we're Israel. So it's, I don't know if yin and yang is the right way to talk about it in terms of Christianity, but these are two themes that are always present. To some extent it depends on how courageous the leadership is to say that we have no blank check from God. I mean, that's almost the default thing we all want to say, personal life, collective life. And it takes courage and good leadership to say, wait a minute.
One of the things that strikes me about this segment that we saw here anyways is the sheer wildness of the religious spirit and its effect on events, the unpredictability and the power that leads people to get mowed down by water cannons and attacked by dogs and come back for more, the same way that Gandhi's followers would come back for more with nonviolent resistance, and that Anne Hutchinson can sit there and stare down these would-be interpreters of God's word and saying, you're wrong, God has spoken to me. So it's, to me, I'm really grateful that we have the constitutional protections that we have, and that if we have a special relationship for God, we allow people to have their own relationships with God, and we don't impose a theological view from the state down, because to me that's one of the great strengths of the country. It's one reason that we continue to hold together under all these strains that we're under right now. At the same time, religion, it's an explosive thing. Mm-hmm. It's a dangerous, unpredictable thing, and it can always get out of hand. So it's a delicate dance.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll shift gears a little bit. We'll take a look at that first segment out of the actual production that'll be starting Monday night. Anne Hutchinson. Pilgrims, 1622. Anne Hutchinson hits the country about 1634. And seems fairly quickly to turn it upside down. And one of the things that says, that she was being accused of, and what a part of the issue was, is Hutchinson's doctrine appealed because it's an easy path to heaven, and it undermined an orderly society. For the Puritans, being saved could never be guaranteed. To understand God's will was a lifetime struggle. Then one of them said, Winthrop needed his people to struggle with their salvation. That struggle was fantastic social glue. I was not totally familiar with Anne Hutchinson. This was a person that just kind of, and so I guess part of it is just that whole general role that she played in that early history. And then that concept of social glue to hold a society together. I think there's another segment early where they talk about it says that, let me try to find it in my notes. How are you going to, the historian asked, how are you going to set up a society where everyone is reading the key document? How are you going to hold them together?
I think what I thought was fascinating about that whole section was the similarities between the Hutchinson story and what had just been separated from with Luther and the church, and some of the things that Luther saw as injustices and grace alone, and then to see that very same power struggle come so early in our history. It's like it just, to me, continues to play. There's nothing new under the sun. These struggles all just continue. And then we look at what happens today in those same struggles with power inside of the church. Who can preach the Word of God, who can't. And now you're looking at the large house church movement that's starting to come, and in the way that a lot of denominations are struggling with that and losing power to people who are opening God's Word themselves. What are you doing? You don't have a minister there. And so it was fascinating to me to look at that and see that power struggle. It's right on the heels of it, and you're like, whoa. So,
I was struck by that too, Christopher. Right? The line in there, we do not, the Protestant imagination says that the Pope should not interpret Scripture for you. So now we move to the pastors and Winthrop interpreting Scripture for you. It's amazing. And it sounds an awful lot like works righteousness. We must, this is hard work. And Hutchinson saying, no, Jesus is going to save me, and it's not work. And there is something, though, that all immediate revelation must be checked against a community, and I think therefore her experience of having an experience of the divine needs to be tested against something besides her own thoughts. So I think there's something that there's always going to be a balance and a tension between the community and the individual believer. I think that needs to be acknowledged too.
Yeah, you could have Ann Hutchinson could be exactly right, and she could have a direct line to God, or she could be David Koresh or Jim Jones, and just be extremely deluded. But I did admire her independence, her rebelliousness, and her courage to just stand up to the power structure and say, I will not be moved. You're wrong. And it reminds me of Rosa Parks saying, I'm not going to sit in this bus anymore, or a Dominican sister saying, I'm going to go to jail as long as you're producing nuclear weapons. There is in religion a tremendous power to stand up to power and to do whatever is necessary in that person's eyes to be true to God.
There's a pretty big backstory to the whole Ann Hutchinson case. Sorry about this. This is an argument that had been going on in England in Puritan circles for 50 years. How much is our initiative in gaining salvation? How much do we wait for God? And those lines were factional lines, and faction in a communitarian setting like this is the death knell. You want to avoid faction. And the ministers in the colony were divided. The majority of them apparently were on the side that Winthrop was espousing, but a pretty strong minority, Anne was kind of channeling them or speaking for them. And also, she had the strong support of the Boston business community, the merchants. If you go back and read the full text of Winthrop's sermon, Where City on a Hill Comes From, about 80% of the space is given to, we got to restrain our economic greed here. And so he's standing for a position that says the whole community kind of has to suffer. We all got to clamp down on ourselves here. And that's, I think, what he means by mocking that free and easy way to heaven. If you feel good, do it. So Anne, particularly in the last 30, 40 years, has been getting all the praise. And Michael Winship, read his book. He was on the screen. He gets it really well.
Another important thing when you think about Anne Hutchinson and what she did, and the Puritans in general, they're coming out of a religious environment in England where persecution and the price you paid for speaking out against religious authority was horrible, torture and death. I mean, that's what you've all heard about the Marian martyrs, and that was the norm in the 16th and early 17th centuries in England and on the continent of Europe. So when Anne Hutchinson, took her stand, she didn't know that she wasn't going to be tortured and killed. I mean, she didn't know what was going to happen to her. And there's, I think, a faith shown by people from that era that I don't know if people today can even imagine, where you would literally be burnt to death for your interpretation, your particular spin on a religion. And that kind of intensity, it's almost hard for us, I think, in the modern age to even imagine that. And that's really part of another part of the backdrop to that story.
Roger, there's a question.
Oh. Would that be a point of that's why they let her go, because they kind of believed her, but they still didn't want to go with what she was saying? They didn't want to do too much to her, like you said, torture her, because they believed that they would be punished, but they didn't want what she believed to disturb what they had already gathered together in the community?
That's a very good, very interesting question. They banish her. They throw her out. And what happens to Anne Hutchinson is that she eventually goes to Long Island, where she's trying to convert the Indians, and she's eventually killed by the Indians. The Puritans, with torture and just how far they could go, not that unless you were an Indian, they showed a certain moderation in that. They could and did. I mean, they did execute and torture and execute some Quakers, but they often showed a leniency that they didn't really have to show and wasn't always shown, by their counterparts back in Europe when they got control. With Anne Hutchinson, they banished her.
Yeah, so these are Calvinists, and they love to obey laws. So when the Quakers come, first Quakers come, and they say, get on the next ship out. They do. Quakers come back. Get on the next ship out, or we'll throw you in prison. Well, throw in prison. And I think it was the fourth visit before they hanged him. They will hang them. I mean, this is, he's absolutely right. This is no fooling stuff, because you're dealing with belief. This is what makes religion so explosive, because you're dealing with ultimate commitments here, right? And somehow these ultimate commitments have to do with the basic rules of trust around us. So this is dynamite. And they were, they knew that they were taking very careful steps to warn people out. And this is part of that leniency. If she had insisted on coming back, they would have kicked her out again. And if she insisted on coming back again, they probably would have executed her.
Your actions and activities are not tolerable in the eyes of God or fitting for your sex. What was the driving motivation there? Tolerable in the eyes of God, fitting for your sex.
No, I was kind of thinking that's why 30 or 40 years ago she started to get some press with the whole women's rights. Sure. And but that even today in church, with women being in pastoral positions and the struggle that comes from something that's typically held by men, and what do we do? And
well, she was speaking in public, that is, say, at these gatherings at her house. She was speaking out against ordained clergy. That one phrase in there, she said, by God's revelation, I know who are the good ministry, what is the good ministry and what is the bad ministry. That's not abstract. Those are ministers. Those four guys are wrong, and the Reverend Wheelwright and one other are right. And I know because God told me. Remember the church lady segment on Saturday Night Live? Yeah? So this Anne Hutchinson is the beacon of American religious freedom and resistance to authority, and that's true, and God bless her. She's also the ancestor of the church lady. Yeah?
from this piece relative to Ann Hutchinson, the ultimate American spiritual experience to have a one-on-one with God, to be able to say that I am now in personal relationship with God. And then, to your point earlier, how is that justified in the community? And are Americans ready for that? Are Americans ready to have the guy next to them say, I'm in communication with God? And how's that going to go?
Well, Abraham Lincoln was not a church member. So, in fact, the majority of Americans in those earlier years were not church members. Even in the Puritan communities, becoming a church member was very difficult. You had to convince, like, the inner circle of church members you were one of them. Most people couldn't do it. And by the way, the majority of church members were women. More women were actually able to do that than men. But during the antebellum period, which is one of the most intensely religious times in our history, still most people chose not to join churches. A lot of people went to churches. Lincoln certainly had a personal relationship with God. He was a spiritual person, but he was not a conventional, I say, maybe you could call him a Christian, but certainly not a church member. So there's not, I don't know if there's necessarily anything new about that.
You don't get a majority of people who are formal church members until pretty deep into the 20th century. Again, there are a lot of church adherents, people showing up. That number depends how you do the statistics, but that number might be constant all along. About 40% are fairly regular church attenders from start to finish. But the graph of who's a formal church member slowly goes up, and then right after World War II, it really skyrockets. Peaks out about 1960, and it hasn't been in free fall ever since, but it's been tracking down.
Is that because membership was considered part of being socially successful or socially fully integrated?
Yeah, well, World War II had uprooted so many people, dispersed people all over the country, that the way to kind of belong was to join a church and or a country club. Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry.
I agree that in this area, and all areas of the country, people will have a wide variety of reactions. The high quality of the production, the historical significance, taking a look at where we've been. But I'm wondering, what other benefits, this is kind of a wide open question, but what other benefits do you think there might be for public dialogue about a program like this? Do you see any unifying benefits to various faith traditions and beliefs for public forums around a program like this? Or any other benefits?
I do. I think Grand Rapids is really ripe for something like that. Part of the God in America outreach program is what they're calling sacred spaces, where a number of cities have organized programs where you can visit houses of worship in an organized way. I think, if we can do Art Prize, I think we can do something like that. Soul Prize. I like it. Wow.
You could vote for the prettiest windows.
You wanted to do Engage. There you got it, son. Soul Prize.
And the DeVosses could put up the money.
I'm watching this preview screening, and you can really see the effects that, or how religion has shaped our history over time, and how it's affected certain events, certain people. But where we are now, we're in this technology age. We have the History Channel. You have anything from the history of founding fathers to doomsday codes and everything. But collectively as a society, how has our history affected our perception of religion, let's say over the last 20, 30 years, especially with the internet age and 200 some channels on TV? What has that done, I think, as not only as individuals but as a society? How's that skew our vision or our view of religion?
Pastor on the other side.
You're of that generation, Christopher.
Oh, throw it on me, guys. I was going to ask you to repeat the question, but it was a long question. Can you give me a synopsis of your question again, please?
How has technology or how has the way man written history, let's say over the last 20 years, and with our production values and movies and History Channel, how has that affected our view of religion? I mean, we know how religion has affected history, but how has that view, I guess, over time affected how we perceive religion and religion's role?
Well, I guess just from looking at it myself, with being in high school ministry for a little over 10 years, and just seeing the changes that happened technologically during that time, watching really from the time I was 14, 15, what a community is to what a community is now, really just continues to make American religious experience totally individual. I mean, now you got people who have earbuds in and they're checked out to everything else in the world and not really tied into a community like this. It's a cyber community, or I'm listening to what I want to pick out of someone else's belief system, and I'll cherry pick a little here and cherry pick a little there. And so I think looking at something like this will help also to see, I guess, the larger scope. So help us to see a little bit larger scope of the history of religion in the United States. For people of my generation, it's not all about me and what I believe, but I'm tied to something that's greater. I don't know if that answers your question, but
we have one more question here,
yes.
And then we're going to try to move on. I've got somebody back there whispering in my ear. Get to the other part.
I'm sorry. This is all like a sub answer, because I was thinking something of the sort when you during the movie that you asked, and I thought all good history stories that I remember and can account for the dates and the actions of the story, they were all rebellious, and all good stories, even in the movie aspect, as they put this together, have some type of rebellion or rebellious spirit of the movie. So in my own perspective, to reach, and I really think this did a good job, they had some type of good storyline that had rebellion in it. So that's how I think it's connecting, because I hate to say it, most young people like an agreement movie, is not that interesting. Everyone agreeing is really boring. But if you have that rebellious person coming up, and most likely that's the history part that we're learning about Martin Luther, the Anne Hutchinson, all was rebellious. So that's how it connected to me.
I'm just going to throw this one out. The whole Abraham Lincoln segment, go for it. I mean, I noticed reactions and comments, and it seems to be, at least of the segments we looked at tonight, the one that kind of piqued a lot of interest. So
before history guys take over this one, I want to just, for me, I read one book, other than my studies, but one book on Abraham Lincoln, and I have always thought that the main reason for the Emancipation Proclamation was largely political and war-driven, and even coming from the Christian perspective. So to me, to hear this statement was really new and quite frankly something that I want to look a little bit more into, which made me appreciate having the documentary. Hey, I'm not just going to take this as this was exactly how it happened, but it gives me something else to think about. And so to see that Christian, or to see that religious section, or that religious aspect of it, to me, was just it was kind of a new.
Well, Lincoln, I just think his religious life was fascinating. And if any of you have gone to D.C. and seen his second inaugural address etched in stone, it's such a powerful statement. Lincoln was a spiritual but not religious guy. I think he was shot through with faith and religion, but at the same time always struggling to try to understand God's will and how can God let this horrible contest go by? How can two sides both believe God is on their side? What is God doing here? You know, if there is a God, what on earth is he doing here? And to me, Lincoln's struggles as presented here really resonate with what's going on now. I mean, I just think so many people are trying to make sense of the strife that we're in the middle of, and God can't be on all of our sides. You know, our nation is terribly divided. You know, religious liberals over here and the religious right over here, and they both think they're right, and they both think they're doing God's will, and, well, somebody's wrong, maybe both sides, as Lincoln said. So I found that very resonant with our culture today.
I was struck certainly by the will of God. I mean, it's a constant theme in this. You know, what is it? And the way he came to realize or come to some appreciation of the will of God is in the end. You don't see it in the beginning or even the process. And the connection then between the death of his son Willie and the Emancipation Proclamation and both of the events, and then the connection between Lincoln and King. With pretty obvious connection. This is an Exodus event, and God is on God. If God doesn't love certain people more than others, but God certainly favors the dispossessed. God certainly favors those who are oppressed. I mean, that theme came through. So this is what's significant in Lincoln's understanding of the Civil War. This horrible suffering is going to be the way to finally free people.
Mm-hmm. Historians?
One of the most interesting statements in the entire documentary, and there were a lot of them, but was one of the civil rights activists said that part of the approach of their movement was that they knew that their opponents knew that they were wrong. In other words, that deep down the Southern segregationists, or a lot of them, agreed with the civil rights movement. And I don't know whether or not that's true for the civil rights movement, maybe not, but it's definitely not true for the Civil War. The slaveholders really believed in slavery. I mean, the South really believed in it, at least most of them. There's always exceptions. At least that's my current understanding of it. And that's why it's so hard to really assign a role of religion in all of this, because the people who were fighting for slavery as hard as the people in the North were fighting, if not harder, thought that slavery was God's will, and that was just the right way. So I just thought that was a particularly interesting statement, and for I think the whole documentary, because Ann Hutchinson's accusers also thought they had God on their side.
Well, with Lincoln's own personal development, the question for me has been, how did he get to the place where he could write the second inaugural, which I think is the best sermon ever preached in the United States. And alas, it's a sermon preached by someone who not only was not a church member, but never went to seminary. Mark Knoll from Wheaton College University of Notre Dame has a thick book, America's God, which he analyzes the Civil War, and he finds this uniform, very current-looking, knee-jerk reaction. God's on our side. No, God's on our side. Ours. And the brilliant breakthrough for Lincoln, now he's a leader of a country at war, and an extremely costly war, right? More casualties than all other American wars put together till about the middle of Vietnam. So this is not beanbag. This is real stuff. And he, in that situation, come up and say, maybe neither side is right. Maybe God is on neither side. And that's for a wartime president. That is, I think it's unparalleled. You see a little bit in Wilson, but it eludes him. That is just really remarkable. And so I would agree that I think the historians' consensus is that the Emancipation Proclamation is principally diplomatic and politically and wartime necessity driven. But in terms of his own personal development, that we can, so a stream running through that is certainly the spiritual one. And a very, a personal confrontation with tremendous suffering that he's responsible for, right? He's signing the draft edicts, calling up these guys to go die. And he knows that. So it's to get through all that and come to an understanding of suffering by kind of re-theologizing is, I think, is really something.
Questions? Okay, we'll kind of jump into that final segment, the Martin Luther King segment. We've got a lot of documents in American history that obviously take on great stature, and where does the letter from the Birmingham jail fit in that?
Pretty highly. I mean, pretty impressive, writing. It's a civil rights issue. It's one of the things you look back on, and you ask yourself is, and you've talked to like older liberals who lived in the North or in America during that time, and you ask them, how could you have tolerated that? How could you have tolerated segregation? Why didn't you do something about it? And at least what I've heard back is they just didn't think about it. It was just something that wasn't on their radar screen. I think either Time or Newsweek, as late as 1960 or 61, civil rights was ranked way down, and the movement was, a lot had happened by 1960 or 61. And what King did is he aroused the consciousness of the country, the people, the sort of the silent majority, if you will, who actually believed in civil rights, and they needed to be, motivated to pressure their congressmen and so forth. And that was the letters from Birmingham jail was part of that. Part of that happening.
You get a lot of great literature out of jail. Paul's epistles, Bonhoeffer, Pilgrim's Progress, and so this is, the way I teach it, it's in that genre, and this is the way that this is where the issue really comes to bear. What are you willing to sacrifice, and what voice, besides rage and anger or depression, all the voices you might predict when you're in jail, what voice can you muster in those circumstances? And it takes something of a literary as well as a spiritual genius to pull it off like he did.
Earlier today at the Print Center at Calvin College, there was a talk. They have a conference on Islam, and a talk by an Islamic scholar who much of his talk was about Martin Luther King and how much he admired King, obviously knows King's work very well, identifies with King, talks about King's theology of justice and humanity, and the role that religion, writ broadly, plays in bringing about justice. And in that sense, the fact that King was a Christian and this man is a Muslim is secondary to what they hold in common about the dignity of people and following God's law to protect all God's children and respect all God's children. And he was saying that his son's high school, they teach all about King, and the son's like, yeah, I have a dream, yeah. They hear this and it becomes like, vanilla pudding to them. And the speaker was saying, they don't realize that King was a rebel. He was a troublemaker. He was a prophet. He was like Jeremiah. He was stirring things up, and he was showing society this is what racism and injustice look like. And in that sense, the letter from Birmingham, his speeches, they're still spine-tingling when you see what he was saying. It applies no less today, I think, than it did then.
The oppressor is not going to give up oppression voluntarily. I think one thing that strikes me about it. And King, as he tries to, here's a man committed to civil society, committed to the United States, committed to the common good, and suggests that, civil laws do not bind when they contradict God's law. If it's not grounded in natural law, which is grounded in God's eternal law, then you can break the law. And I think that's a very significant thing for him, because like God, he feared anarchy. But he said there are times we must risk that. because if it's not grounded in God's law, then it doesn't bind us in any way. I mean, I find this in some of the works of the Bishop of Rome, John Paul II, some of the same arguments in his encyclical 95 as you find in King.
Andrew Young, as he was wrapping up that segment, talked about most particularly, and particularly educated Americans get uncomfortable when their emotions and their spirituality get the best of their intellect. But there are times when intellect can't handle it. And then he goes on to say the truly religious moments in our civil rights movement didn't make any intellectual sense. Nobody in their right mind would do some of the things we did. But we did it because we were caught up in the Spirit. Is there anything going on in our culture right now at this moment that might get us caught up in the Spirit? That's banging on our emotions and our spirituality that our intellect can't handle?
I think in the modern world, maybe we're overwhelmed by so much. You know, if you watch the news, you see the floods in Pakistan, you read some horrible civil war in Africa, the economy, you know, and people out of work and suffering and, you know, child slavery. And I think sometimes we just get bombarded by it, and you don't even know what to do. It's like you almost want to shut it down with all the information we have. And, you know, with these BlackBerries, you can read about any of those things and almost anything else you want with just a few clicks. And I think that's maybe what's going on today, is we're just bombarded with. We have so much information that we almost become immune to a lot of these stories, where, you know, maybe people who were caught up in the Spirit could actually do some good. Not that there aren't people trying. I mean, there are people that are, you know, sacrificing their lives and so forth to deal with all of these problems.
It's like the Spirit's been taken captive by either side or every place along the spectrum. And at least if you look at Christian history, that's exactly when you can expect it, him, her, whatever, to spring loose again in a surprising way. But because it's a surprising way, we can't calculate it. So sometimes that's about the only hope I have.
And I had two things I thought were kind of interesting around that whole last piece that I wrote down. The story of the Bible doesn't end with the Bible, but continues on. Yeah. The same activity of God wanting freedom for the Israelites is continuing on today. And then I guess just the process, and for me, probably one of the most powerful quotes, or the most powerful quote for me, was Martin Luther King Jr.'s quote, "Don't let anybody make you think that God chose America as his divine messianic force, to be a sort of policeman of the whole world. God has a way of standing before the nations with judgment, and it seems that I can hear God saying to America, 'You are too arrogant. If you don't change your ways, I will rise up and break the backbone of your power.'" To me, as I look at what can happen so much as we don't realize that we are continuing on in that journey from the time God created to now, and that the Bible continues on. And if we think that God is for us rather than we are for God, then we get things incredibly backwards, and we do a lot of damage to God's name and to other people in the process. And so I think just being aware of history through programs like this and learning from it is incredibly valuable, and hopefully something that will reach a bunch of new people in new ways.
Final questions.
The question. Okay. Well, you had spoke on how the Spirit is being, what anything is coming up now, and I thought about with anything we can either choose to conform, confront, or conversate, or be confused. And with any issue, there's so many things coming up. We're picking and choosing what is personally affecting us that we want to address.
Okay. Any final thoughts on? Oh, I'm sorry. Did we have a question over here?
I thought the gentleman in the second row had a question. No. Oh,
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Just kind of run across the kind of final wrap-up thoughts, and we're out of here.
Wow, there's a lot. You know, we discussed a lot, and I just think conversations like this are very productive. It's probably good to have them not only in the universities, but in the churches and synagogues and mosques and community centers. And people just have to continue discussing these things and thinking about them and, you know, working to solve the many problems we face.
Any final thoughts?
I'm really looking forward to seeing the whole 6 hours, probably not at once. But I think I'm using a lot more visual stuff in my own teaching as of this year. I made a pedagogical shift, and the visuals really get the attention of the Twitter generation, and you can build up good discussions from that. So I'm really grateful for the resource that this is going to be, and I look forward to seeing the whole thing.
Well, I do hope that a lot of people watch it, and I hope it's more than just a passive viewing experience. I hope it does encourage some more conversation. I'd love to see a Sacred Spaces event in Grand Rapids. I think we're ripe for it. We're very religious around here, but we're very religious inside our own boxes, and we're not so good at being curious or open to other people. And having covered all kinds of faiths for 15 years, I can tell you they are all so grateful when you show up at their door. Just the fact that you're interested in them and what they believe. They're not trying to convert you, they're just grateful. And I think coming off of this, that would be a great way for us to improve our understanding of who we all are who live around here. Because this place is changing. It's not the Dutch Reformed Grand Rapids of your childhood. And we got, a lot. We got a Hindu temple, and we got a new mosque in East Paris, and we've got a Sikh temple, and the landscape is changing, and I just think it's so important for us to know more about each other. And in fact, it's quite rewarding. It's not really work. It's actually quite a joy. So.
And I see that. I see this as a community event rather than the church event. I mean, you can use churches as sites, but if it's a community event, it will certainly both enhance. We can be as literate about religion as atheists and agnostics. Even Christians can move in that direction, maybe. So I think I see this as a very exciting possibility. And I think what's interesting about it is not just some things on television are rather bizarre, or the scripts or scriptures that Christians don't want you to know, or Hitler and the occult. But this, I think, has a broader appeal. Yeah. And it's focused on the American experience as part of the American Experience series. I'm looking forward to it.
And I think just speaking from someone who has 6 children and wants to see them understand the heritage of what, being raised here in this country and being Christian, as well as the congregation that I get to be part of ministering to, just a continued growth in your understanding of what you believe and why you believe it. There are so many people, like the Pew study said, that just have no idea. It's just my dad, mom believed that, and so I believe it now too. They're Republicans, so I'm Republican. And I think to get people to really take a close look at why do you believe what you believe? And I think programs like this will really help to do that. And so I'm looking forward. I'm really looking forward to it as well. So.
Thank you, gentlemen, for being here, for being panelists. Thank all of you for being here. And I guess my concluding thought will be, I've listened to my son use the word engage all night. Maybe if some of you all really want to engage out of your experience, we won't have 5 white males up here because we'll have a broader base from which to work. But thank you very much.